Is Leti in the room?
I am.
Yep.
Morning, Leti, and we've got
Morning.
Knox and Kleyn as well. Okay, so over to you, Professor Burton.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm quite sure there are still going to be others joining us because we had a kind of overwhelming response to people interested in this webinar, which is very encouraging. So let me just start by following the formalities of the community of practice, and then I'm going to just make a few introductory remarks, and then we have our two speakers and a response, and after that we will have an opportunity for everybody to ask all the questions that they then won't be afraid of asking, because they will have heard all of these presentations. So let me start by just saying that we do need to, because the community of practice has them, just confirm the minutes from our last meeting, which was on the 30th of July, and we did send out the minutes. I apologize that they were actually quite late, but our minutes always make a record of what we have discussed in these meetings. So they're quite detailed, and I just would like to ask if anybody who's here has any comments about the minutes or any corrections. I'm not going to go through it page by page and item by item. It is long and it is detailed, but if you have had time to read, is there anybody who would like to make any comment about the minutes from our last meeting? Any hands? Okay, well, let us take the minutes then as correct. And if there are any questions, please do feel free to put them into the chat. And if you haven't had time to read them, do, because they make for interesting reading about all the discussion that we had last time. So thank you. Let us accept them. Can I have just a couple of comments or hands up to confirm approval? Thank you, Patrick. One other? Jenny, thank you very much. Good. Jenny, did you want to ask a question or make a comment?
I think not, Prof. Her hand has gone down.
No, I think it was just a hand, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Right, so I'm very excited about our agenda today, because this is a topic that we have had going for a while, and I'm going to take the liberty of sharing a few slides to make some introductory comments myself. After that, we will have Mr. Kleyn Truran, who is the director of the South African National Library and Information Consortium, SANLiC, which has been bringing all of these questions together for some time. Then we will have Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu, who is the manager for the International Collaborative Research Grants at the National Research Foundation. And then we are going to, I have asked one of my colleagues, Dr. Leti Kleyn, who has experience over many years of open scholarship activities, to speak as a response to what is there. But if I may, I'm going to share my slides and just make some introductory comments myself now, with the help of a few slides. And let me say thank you very much to Dr. Leti Kleyn for assisting me with this. We had this discussion and have had this discussion over a while. So she has been particularly helpful in formulating these ideas. All I intend to do in this is to just set the scene very briefly for some of the background and some of the questions that I think we are seeking to answer. So on open access publishing then, we have had at least a decade of themes for Open Access Week. We've had Open Access Week nationally and internationally going for 10 years. And in the slide, you can see that we have moved from ideas around collaboration through wondering how on earth to manage open knowledge, who's open, what about equity, what about inclusion, and then open for a number of other particular ideas or concepts. And the most recent Open Access Week was last week, and we had the title at USAF of Who Owns Our Knowledge, which was a very interesting and quite intense discussion. But over the years, we've seen calls for a number of actions: collaboration, equity, inclusion, climate justice, community ownership, and the discussion around open access has become rather more broad, and there are many different aspects to it, and I think that's what we're going to hear today. There are some issues, and I won't read all of this to you, but there are some issues that are kind of ongoing. The issue of how we relate research assessment to publishing and therefore to open access. The issue of the kind of business models which are based on article publication charges, or article page charges, which can be exclusive. They can be particularly problematic for some authors in some particular situations, institutions, and regions. And then there's the question about research funders and what they have as expectations, which is not necessarily the same as what academic institutions have, as priorities and a need for collaboration. There are new publishing models. I'm looking forward to what Kleyn will have to say about this, because the focus between commercial publishers and new publishing models is the sort of hot topic at the moment. And then there's also the issue of the copyright, which I also think Kleyn might touch on, but the issue of the copyright for scholarly work in the past always being owned by the commercial publisher, and that can be problematic in terms of open access. So we have many issues still to discuss. So have we made progress over 10 years? Well, yes, we have. There's been a growing momentum to all of this. There's been the rise of the Diamond Open Access, which I think we will have explained to us. There are moves for publishers to transition from their previous models to open access outputs and the so-called subscribe to open. And then there have been many advancements around the open infrastructure, the managing of information, data, and of course publishing. So we're in the middle of a very interesting time. Interestingly, there have been other organizations who have been leading some of this, and in particular UNESCO have made some points about national drives for openness. This shows that Africa has a lot of gaps, but interestingly, Ethiopia has government or national legislation about openness in publishing, and so do one or two other countries. In South Africa, USAF has been very strongly supportive of open access. This title was the title of an article in 2023 during Open Access Week, some support, an article about the government's support and the need for a national policy on open access. And most recently, we had our Open Access Week last week, as I said, and there are articles on the webpage of USAF about that at the moment. So we, being a community of practice hosted by USAF, have the opportunity to listen to and read so many of these opinions. USAF has been clear in supporting the principles which were set out by the International Science Council. I won't read all these to you, but of course there's a web link at the bottom of this slide, and there are a number of principles that the ISC have laid out which call for using these principles to manage the appropriate use of open access or operation of open access research and publishing. Here's an interesting example again. The government of India has a One Nation, One Subscription scheme. Again, different from what we have, but an interesting example of what's going on in the world is that this very strong move towards some form or management of open access. At the NRF, and I'm not going to say much about this because we are privileged to have Nokuthula with us, but the NRF has been publishing and has argued for open science for some time, and I think we have a useful champion there, and I'm very much looking forward to what Nokuthula will have to say about the NRF's approaches at the moment. So my last slide is this one. We are a community of practice in postgraduate education and scholarship, and the question that I don't really have an answer to, or I have not written an answer to, is this one. What should we be telling our postgraduate students about publishing? Because if you think about it, they have expectations from a number of different angles. Universities call for high quality research and high impact journal publications. Supervisors have expectations of publishing, students publishing even before they graduate. Our university IP officers are talking about who owns the IP, and it is not the students. Our funders are looking for research outcomes and outcomes leading to innovation. And everybody is asking who budgets for and pays for article page charges. So I hope that by the time we finish today, we will have thought about how we manage our postgraduate education and what we should be assisting our postgraduate students with. So that's my introduction to all of this. I used the slides particularly because I feel that this is such a big question. But I am now going to ask Kleyn Truran to give his presentation. As I say, he's the director of SANLiC and has been very helpful in discussing open access of different sorts. And now his title for his talk is Everything Researchers Need to Know about publishing free open access, but are afraid to ask. And I'm really hoping that by the end of this, we're not afraid to ask. So Kleyn, thank you. Over to you. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Sorry, yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. I just need to make a little adjustment on my side.
Yes. The procedure is your method. That's critical. And the one thing we easily talk about randomization, we easily talk about selection, we easily talk.
Sorry, my apologies. I'm just having a technical problem. Please bear with me.
Okay.
Right, there we go. Okay.
Right.
So thank you so much, Stephanie, for the introduction. And so I'm going to talk about earn to cap FOA barter. I assume you all know what that's about, don't you? It's everything researchers need to know about publishing free open access, but are afraid to ask. My background is non-profit organizations, and I worked for the Paraffin Safety Association that was trying to address the unacceptably high rate of injuries and deaths, especially to children in informal settlements due to the use of paraffin. And I recall being extremely frustrated that the knowledge that would have assisted us in preventing the harm was not accessible unless one had to pay US dollars. And that was my introduction to the paywall. I'm not sure exactly what your expectations are, so I actually would be most grateful if folks could write in the chat either directly to me or to everyone, but directly to me if you're afraid to ask. Any specific questions. My understanding is that we have a very broad spectrum of audience, and I'm sure some of you are sick of hearing about open access, whereas others might be new to it. What is open access publishing? It's a response to the fact that the current system is not fit for purpose, and it empowers researchers to retain the ownership or copyright to their own material, and it ensures that a wider audience can access the knowledge. So how is research communicated? The first paper, the first journal was produced in 1323 in France, and there was a similar journal almost the same year. And in 1660, the Royal Society of London was founded, and so on and so forth. So right up until about 30, 40 years ago, the predominant method of disseminating information was through journals, the research papers in journals in print form. The rise of Elsevier is very interesting because somebody who was involved in propaganda during the war went out of business when the war was over and had to look for alternative work, and managed to convince academia to sign over the copyright of their content so that they could take over the distribution and dissemination of research outcomes. And that was the rise of commercial publishers. But to be honest, when we look at the costs involved, there are some non-commercial publishers and university publishers that are more expensive than some of the commercial publishers, which is a bit of a problem. So with all of these challenges, the open access movement emerged, but with every solution comes new sets of problems. And so predatory publishing and other forms of misconduct arose. And eventually we ended up with what are known as transformative agreements or transformational agreements, or what I prefer to call read and publish agreements. I highly recommend you visit the CoP website. But according to them, all out of the 66 million papers that have been produced between 2010 and 2024, half of them remain behind a paywall. And the other half are either available in green open access on another platform or open on a publisher website, or both. So if you look at South Africa's trajectory, you'll see that we went from a state of about 75% closed in 2000. And in 2024, we reduced that to 32%. And you'll notice that there's a steep increase in open access in recent years. When you look at the largest producers of research articles, the United States was the leader until recently, and 51% of their content remains closed. And if you look at publisher closed, it's more like 80%. Sorry, it's more like, what's that, 30, 45, it's more like 55%. China is worse, and they have overtaken the United States in terms of research output. So with the current the current system where one pays a subscription to read, we're actually financing the dissemination of the research output of some of the most powerful nations in the world. So this is an article I'd encourage you to have a look at, but this expressed for me better than anywhere else why open access is so crucial. And it really is because knowledge shouldn't be a privilege, and it should be for the benefit of the entire, the whole of society and for the globe as well. So what is a transformative agreement? It's an agreement where you combine the cost of reading and the cost of publishing into one agreement, and it replaces article processing or publishing charges or author-facing charges. So it enables researchers to publish without having to pay. I'm not going to dwell on the UNESCO recommendations. Stephanie's already mentioned the International Science Council's 8 principles. But I think that the part I really like is this idea that there are no barriers to participation, in particular those based on the ability to pay, institutional privilege, language, or geography. So when SANLiC got approval to engage in read and publish or transformative agreements, there were 4 key objectives that we had. The one is to ensure that our researchers could have as much read access as possible of anything that is behind a paywall. We wanted to ensure that they had the ability to publish full and immediate open access without having to surrender the ownership of their knowledge, and without having any author-facing charges. We wanted to contain and reduce the cost of our members, and we wanted to address issues of inclusivity and social justice. So SANLiC came about in sort of the early 2000s, and our initial purpose for existing was to combine the collective purchasing power of our members to manage the costs of read access. But in addition, now that we've got into read and publish agreements, you know, for example, in 2024, we also saved our members an additional 300 million rand in costs that would have been charged for open access publishing. So cost avoidance is essentially looking at what something would have cost as compared to what was achieved through collaboration and through a consortium. So I've covered all of this already, so you know I'm going to move on. But I think the most important point to understand is that in these read and publish agreements, there is no APC to be paid, with the exception of fully open access journals, which usually were not part of the reading agreement. But in some cases, we've achieved additional benefits in the fully open journals as well. And that's where things start to get complicated for researchers. So our biggest challenge is that in terms of all the reading access and most of the APC publishing, more than 98% of that occurs in a foreign currency. And the reason why that is such a problem is that our purchasing power has been declining steadily since the early 1980s. And we've lost 95% of our purchasing power against the US dollar over this period of time. And in fact, in the last 10 years, we've lost 26% of our purchasing power. in spite of Donald Trump's best efforts to weaken the US currency against all other currencies. So before engaging in the read and publish agreements, we needed some evidence to work out what was going on. And we conducted our own research of from 2014 to 2019. And we found that the blue represents closed or paywalled publishing. And the lighter colors, as you can see from the table at the bottom, represents open access publishing. And we found that both forms were growing, although the open access publishing was growing faster than the closed publishing, but that the majority of our research output was in closed publishing. In fact, 2/3 of it was closed over that period of time. So this was the challenge that we wanted to address. And when we disaggregated that information by publisher, it became very clear that if we could get read and publish deals with the big five, we would cover a huge portion of the challenge. And it's interesting to note that the deals that were outside of SANLiC, that is where most of our open access publishing was taking place. So when you break down the costs involved of both reading, the blue, and publishing, the other colors, you could see that if all journals flipped overnight to fully open access, and if we had to pay the average APC for the articles, we would have almost halved our expenditure on research communication. And if we dealt with only the big five, we would have addressed possibly 80% of the expenditure. So it became obvious what sort of strategy to take. And today we have 16 read and publish agreements so far. But it is unfortunately complicated, but they cover more than 80% of the research output of our members. And this subscribers is the member institutions that subscribe to each deal. And what it meant is that these pie charts are pie charts of publishing in closed and hybrid journals. Hybrid being journals that allow you to publish open access with a fee or through a read and publish agreement, but that are essentially subscription-based. And you can see that over a short period of time, we converted more than 80% of those journals into venues where South African authors could publish open access for free without any further costs to their institution and without any author-facing charges. So it meant that when you combine that with the fully open access publishing in the gold, we had radically reduced our reliance on publishing behind a paywall. Now, when you compare that to the United States, you'll see that this system of needing to pay to see articles behind the paywall means that we are essentially funding places like the United States. So we're very proud of what was achieved by participating in these agreements and continues to be achieved on an ongoing basis. We've repurposed half of all the overall reading subscription expenditure on those 16 agreements. So we've managed to, without paying more, we've managed to convert some of what we spend into covering publishing and effectively reduced the reading cost as a result. Although the cost to our members has been similar, except for the open access publishing fees. We've increased the volume of journals in which our research members can publish, and there's a dramatically higher share of corresponding authorship published open access by South Africa. And these benefits apply to 80% of the venues that our authors typically choose. So this is just a diagram, a diagrammatic representation of the growth in the number of journals that are involved. So there's over 12,000 journals involved at the moment. Now this is where it gets messy, because we tried our hardest to include free publishing in fully open journals or gold journals. And we only achieved that with Wiley, Cambridge, American Chemical Society, Institute of Physics, and Bentham, which amounted to 769 of the journals, of the fully open journals. And then there were various discounts achieved with the other deals. It was great to get recognition from the G20 Research and Innovation Scorecard in 2024, where they recognized that South Africa is publishing above the average for the G20 countries. And this is, you can correlate this to the introduction of the read and publish agreements. So our research output in the read and publish agreements, which is effectively open access, has grown considerably over the last 4 years, and we expect it to grow even further going forward. And I've already mentioned the savings on publishing. Now, some of the deals, the publishers insist on capping the number of article entitlements that we can enjoy in the hybrid open access format. And sadly, this year, we hit the cap last week, ironically, in the open access week for Springer. We've used up our cap for Springer in 2025, and we've been encouraging through our networks to get our researchers to think about publishing in similar journals in the other stables like Taylor and Francis, Wiley, Elsevier, Sage, and so on. So this is a representation of the impact of the read and publish agreements. This Taylor and Francis came into effect in 2024, and you can see an immediate flip from publishing behind the paywall to publishing open access. The same applies with Springer, in fact, to a much greater degree. Almost everything we pay to Springer, I think we only pay 6% of what we used to pay goes to reading, and the other 94% goes to publishing. Excuse me. So, and again, with Elsevier, although Elsevier has been far more disappointing in terms of the conversion rate to open access. I'm not going to go into these costs, but we've repurposed 51% of the costs. And the way we are starting to measure agreements is the cost per article. And I just come out of a negotiation with Oxford University Press, and it's uncanny that we're paying a university publisher an equivalent of £5,000 per article, when someone like Springer is almost half the price and is making a 27% profit. So, you know, things are really uneven. But if we look at the benefits for researchers, I think the most important benefits are that your research is seen by so many more people. This is from Springer, showing that the anonymous usage represents users who do not subscribe to the Springer package. Therefore, you know, are they would otherwise not have accessed our research output. And it's interesting that there's more usage from other countries than in South Africa. And again, it's the United States and China who consume the most. This is just the reason I dropped this slide in here. This is from a webinar run by IOP Publishing. And I want you to know that all of our deals, almost all of them, include support for researchers. And they have webinars and workshops on a variety of subjects that are of interest to researchers, such as how to get involved in peer review, how to improve your acceptance rate of articles, and so on and so forth. But it's interesting that they reckon that you get 70% more exposure, 50% more impact in terms of citations, and 19% higher altmetric scores when you move to open access. So it's a bit of a no-brainer from that point of view. I'm going to skip these slides because of time. One of the challenges is the rapidly evolving AI landscape, but I'm sure you've had many discussions about that already. So what does it mean for an author? It means that you and or your institution will retain ownership of your article. You'll be able to reuse it as you wish, and your article will be free to read immediately. Now, here's the rub. Some of the publishers have perverted the Creative Commons licenses to try and make more money. And obviously, the AI creates a new opportunity for them to resell your content to large language models and the like. And so the problem is that you as an author cannot be expected to understand all the legalese and the copyright laws. And yet some publishers are making it sound like CC by NC or CC by NCND is a better option. But what they're doing is they're then asking you to sign a copyright agreement that says that while you can publish open access, they retain the ownership of the rights to the content, so that they can sell it on, which is totally unacceptable, and a problem that we're trying to address through agreements and through research. So you will see that some of the publishers are better than others, but the clear message is, wherever possible, and you do have the choice, insist on CC by publishing, and we're trying to make sure that the workflow that the authors see supports that. Now, there are problems with read and publish agreements or transformative agreements, and one has to find a way of moving on and getting to a point where you no longer have to pay to read, but still have access to all that paywalled content. And there's no time to go into that detail, but we are trying to look into how we move beyond read and publish agreements eventually, step by step, slowly keep pushing the wedge into the doorway. So there are many challenges, which I don't want to go into in too much detail, except for concern about research assessment incentives. There are many who believe that publishing reform in terms of transitioning to open access is impossible without research assessment reform. And the problem is that we're set up to publish or perish. And there are real problems around that, and that's something that has to be addressed as well. The other problem is that we are structurally set up in a scenario where everybody understands paying to read, and that affects our workflows, it affects our financial flows, and it affects our evidence-based costing of how to transition to a better system. this is my concluding slide. So the scoop on what authors need to know or want to know but are afraid to ask, I decided to go with the journalistic who, what, why, where, and how. And who benefits? Well, the whole world benefits. Who is eligible? You have to be a submitting or corresponding author to benefit from the free and immediate open access publishing, and your institution has to be subscribing to that particular deal. And if you aren't sure where, you go and talk to your library or you use the SANLiC website, and I'm pleased to report that most of our deals, we've analyzed them, and more than 80% of the content is on, more than 80% of the journals are on the DHET lists of approved journals. And I've got written confirmation that the emerging, I forget the exact term for it, the emerging sources citation index, which heavily favors South Africa and the other BRICS nations, has been included under Clarivate in the DHET lists. So a lot more African journals are now included in the lists, and that should promote collaboration on the African continent. And why are we doing this? Well, as I mentioned, knowledge shouldn't be a privilege. So, you know, we'll be evolving. We're trying to move to new models. There are challenges with every single model. Diamond open access seems to be the current lead in terms of popularity, but the challenge is always how to have sustainable funding in that particular model, and that challenge needs to be addressed. There's a subscribe to open model where with some of the deals you continue to pay your subscription and you have full open access publishing rights. But I think that my takeaway message is there are so many more opportunities out there to do what one of my library colleagues says that all researchers want is, she always used to say, researchers say, make me famous and save me time. And I think that through these read and publish deals through SANLiC, we hope that you can take advantage of us making you famous and saving you time. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kleyn. And I so understand that last sentiment about making our authors famous and saving them time. That was very comprehensive. Thank you. I am going to ask that the audience keep their questions and comments until we've finished with the presentations. So I'm going to ask now for Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu, who is from the National Research Foundation, the International Collaborative Research Grants section. So Nokuthula, if you would like to give us your presentation, we are looking forward to hearing your presentation on navigating page charges and publishing choices in open access. So thank you so much, and over to you.
Let me share, hopefully you can see.
Yep, we can see.
Yeah, okay. It's good afternoon. Again, apologies. I hope I stay connected. I'm on travel this week, and it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Prof. Burton, for the invitation. Yeah, it's everything researchers need to know about publishing free open access, but are really afraid to ask us. The title of this webinar. I'm going to take a little bit departure and think of myself as a postgraduate student and in this publishing environment. probably most of you, and when I was a student, probably not so much, because when I was a student, the money was more for the project, but these days the money is for the publishing. So you're probably thinking, where you're going to get the money to publish. So this is because, of course, it's what Kleyn started talking about a little bit. These are outdated. It's just the sheer cost of publishing, with the different journals in these publishers costing a little bit more or a little bit less. So this is currently what we're being asked to pay, and Kleyn touched on it, is that if you think, of course, of the dollar exchange rate, so if we take the median on the top, if you're thinking about what we're paying, about $2,500 and you times it by 18, you are closer to 50,000 or 40,000 rands into just paying for a paper. So I want us to pause a little bit and think about this, that the 40,000 rands is not just the cost of the paper. The cost of the paper was the amount that you applied to do the research. So it was the amount of funding that funded the research. And if you're a student, this also includes the amount of the postgraduate scholarship. Then on top of that, you have to pay the 40,000. So the cost of publishing this work is really expensive, but the actual cost of producing the work belongs somewhere. These are the two things we need to think about. So Kleyn started talking about the big five. So a little bit between 2019 and 2023, it cost the research or the scientific community about $10 billion just to publish open access. This is the cost of open access. Again, I will go back. We are publishing the knowledge that you already paid for to produce. So this is what, as now as a community and students, we really need to think about. And then while we're on that, I'm going to ask you to think about this question: why do we do research? Because I want to take a little bit departure on the square box that we've been put in. So I'm going to ask, it's a good thing I'm in two divides, that people put in the chat box, that why do they do research? A little bit, why did you choose to do research? Was it to be famous, as Kleyn had indicated? Or was it to solve a particular problem, or to impact society, or to improve humankind life in some way or the other? As Kleyn, when he opened his talk, he talked about why he got into publishing. Because working for an NGO, he couldn't access information. So that information was not to make someone famous, but it was to solve a particular problem. I cannot read the chat. Hopefully, Jeanette, people are putting answer. And I'm thinking, for me, when I entered postgraduate, was to definitely solve a societal problem. So my next question would be, does publishing in the large, relatively way we do solve those problems? So this is why then holistically, when we now think about publishing, we have to think about, why do we publish? So for me, when we think about publishing open access, one is, what are you publishing open access? And why are you publishing it? So of course, there are many things to think about this. So Kleyn started talking about new models of publishing. And as you can see in my slide, I try not to use the word publishing. I prefer now to use the word science communication. Because when we use the word publishing, we think of it as a way to publish an article. Some of you are more probably well-versed in using social media than me. Isn't that not publishing open access? If you are taking the knowledge that you are producing and putting it in a communicating platform, that somebody can access that knowledge openly without having to pay, isn't that a way to communicate knowledge? Isn't now that is available to everybody? It didn't cost you anything to make that knowledge available. It didn't cost anyone to access that knowledge. And the beauty of this in this new model is that it should be available for the whole society. And this is where I become critical of the of the current publishing model, community or system, because it is again made for peer-to-peer communications, for researcher-to-researcher communication, where you prepare an article for a whole year, picking if you should use is or was or whatever, and you have this discourse between reviewers, just not on what you are trying to say, but on the language itself, that this article has a poor language, although it has good science, which really, I'm not sure what it means, but this is what we do because we want to be acknowledged by our peers to say we're doing good work. And also, that means we want a pat on our back because, of course, a little bit, I know Kleyn was saying it tongue in cheek, but in reality, we've been driven in the course of our postgraduate and research life, moving from the core value why people entered research, which is helping society, into being famous. So we really need now to think about why do we do research? And when we come to that answer, then is why do we communicate the work or the knowledge that we do so that knowledge becomes a public good? Then it answers the questions for this year's Open Access Week, which ended last year, who owns the knowledge? Because as long although we are saying we're democratizing knowledge and knowledge is open for all to access, is only open for those who can understand it. But how we write research article is not to be consumed by the normal society. So how do we, as also postgraduates, slowly move away from elitism to communicating our work to the stakeholders that we do for? And this will, again, I will touch on the same point that Kleyn touched on research incentive. As long as our universities and maybe funders and government do not recognize that communicating your work to the community, making the impact, and you don't get reward for this, will not drive this sort of behavior. All of the stakeholders need to do their bit to make sure that now we do research for impact, not research just to publish. So we move away for impact journal metrics like citation and impact factor. We move to impact on what has the research done to the community. You can still communicate your knowledge through other forms of publishing. And this is where some of it, yes, Diamond Open Access can help. But again, if it also stays structurally constrained to the current publishing model, we will not push the knowledge to the stakeholders, to the policymakers, to the community, so that they can also get the scientific knowledge. As we know, when we went through COVID, the problem was misinformation, because as scientists got stuck into publishing while people needed simplified language, scientists talking to common people to say what is required to fight that current crisis that was happening there and there. So we really need to think about, when we talk about science communication as a whole, how much of knowledge do we need to communicate to our PS, which is scholarly communication, and how much science communication we should do to the whole society. So of course, we have publishing models, as Kleyn has started talking about it. For scholarly communication, I am personally, and of course some of it NRF supports, a little bit of hybrid, gold, and of course diamond repositories. But this, if you want to communicate your knowledge, this is cost-free to authors and institutions. But of course, institutions also have placed a stigma on these types of publishing models because they do not have impact factors or who's hosting this. This is where it becomes about excellence and quality and who determines what is that. So I will stop there for now. And I hope that for today, I have made some of you think about how we do our work and why we got into doing this work that we do and what do we want to do when we communicate the knowledge that we have created in the universities. Thank you. Sorry, Stephanie, I didn't stick to the script, but I had hoped that somebody has had talked to me about this when I went through my research career.
Nox, thank you. I can tell you from the WhatsApps that I'm getting and people's comments in the chat that you've just really hit a spot. And thank you for your very straight talking views. I think they are very valuable, and I hope that when people have an opportunity, they will be able to ask some more questions about it. But really, thank you for being very practical. And I think the points you've made have been probably in many people's minds. And we were just saying that we ought to be publishing more about this ourselves. We ought to be writing more about this in the popular press, or the popular academic press at least. So Nokuthula, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure there will be some questions presently. But what I'm going to do now is ask Dr. Leti Kleyn to kind of respond to some of this. Dr. Kleyn has been involved through our university library earlier on and more recently through a research leadership fellowship that I lead with her assistance. And we have talked many times about things like open access. So now I'm going to ask Leti to respond and to give her views from the point of view of somebody who has worked for so long in all of this. And I can see from her first slide, this is going to be interesting. Leti, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I just quickly, while Kleyn and Nokuthula was speaking, I just quickly compiled 5 slides just to make it a little bit more appealing for you guys. It's really interesting that I think over the last 10 years, we've moved forward, but very, very slowly. And if I listen to both of the speakers, and I also understand the situation within my own institution, the issue remains an issue of power more than necessarily money, although we need money and money makes a lot of things so much easier. And it reminded me a little bit that on a non-practical level, when we talk about these things, we talk about the issue not necessarily of accessibility, but of geography, because that will determine your ability to access. Obviously, it's a financial discussion. It's an ownership discussion that I think is incredibly important for the continent. We are very aware of the fact that Africa struggles to keep its own data. We have too much helicopter research coming in, and obviously also whatever research that we produce. We cannot get away from the fact that education and publication within the South African environment, and I think for the African environment as well, is a ranking system. And it's a system of prestige, and it's a battle. Every year the universities battle each other as to who will come out top of the rank. And that's also important. I don't think it's something that we should walk away from. But I think there's a lot of bigger issues that we also have to consider. and not look at each of these elements in isolation. I was reminded also of a book that was published in 2018. It's called Shadow Libraries. And it's very interesting that despite the fact that there's some examples from Russia, India, South Africa, Argentina, Poland, and Brazil, that each of those countries adopted a different way of getting information out into the world because of the kind of government systems that they had. And the introduction is a very interesting part on what it means when you have access from above and access from below. And I think before you worry that I'm going to say, let's go all out undisciplined, I think there are very many ways that we can look at these things. And maybe there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for the country and maybe even for the continent. So if we look at India, India clearly said what we want is happiness and peace and access for all. And that includes not only access for universities or government-funded universities, that's also for private higher education, it's for government departments, and maybe in a very diluted way, also for them, for the general public. China has done something completely different. They kind of like just dumped all of their stuff onto the system in a way where whatever they contribute can actually not be ignored, whether it's the positives or the negatives of that. But that's also one way of changing the system. Sci-Hub comes from the Ukraine, so that's a little bit of a more resilient environment that's really for support in shadow libraries. Ethiopia also took a bit of a stance in saying openness in terms of everything is the best way to go. And that might include openness to government data and more government transparency and so forth. And then obviously Russia, that's got its own problems, because there it might not even be just access to information. For them, it's still an issue of accessing the internet and the kind of information that they get. And maybe it might be interesting to also go back and see what it is that we want to do nationally and how we're going to do it. And Nokuthula, I think it was really interesting when you spoke about why do we do the research. And I think what's really important is that if we don't change, whether we're a librarian or a researcher or a postgrad student, if we don't change in every little bit that we can, even if it sometimes requires a little bit of a compromise, the world isn't going to change and these systems aren't going to change. I think Glenn's made it clear that we're not going to really save money. It's very interesting, or we haven't started to save money yet. It's interesting that with the India plan, it's also clear that it's more expensive for them, but it seems like they are willing to pay to have free access for the entire country. But I think if each of us just take a little responsibility, that is going to, maybe slow and steady, is what's going to win the race. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Prof. Burton.
Thank you. And again, very insightful views, and I think we have still a great deal to talk about and to think about. So there have been a few comments in the chat, and I don't know if the speakers have had an opportunity to look at them, but I think, well, this is now the opportunity for the audience. So I think we can do two things. One is I will give the speakers a little bit of time to glance through the chat now that they not actually presenting. And in a moment, I'll invite you to comment on any of those. But may I just ask anybody who's in the audience, if you would like to put your hand up, you are very welcome to either make a comment or ask one of the speakers for a question. Please, if you can, use your your team's hand. Otherwise, you can put the question into the chat. So any comments or questions from 142 people who are on this webinar? Anna Leonard, please go ahead.
Hello. Oh,
You're muted. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Prof, for the opportunity, and to all the presenters. It is really thought-provoking topics that we are talking about here today, and I am really glad because of the diversity of the context from which the ideology on issues of open science and impact demonstrations are coming from. You know, I was doing a research on kind of a similar topic, trying to look at the evaluations of the research performance from the Namibian public universities, in which at one stage researchers started to speak about these issues of impact and the biasness in research performance evaluations from the institution's point of higher education, really. And, you know, in as much as we are saying that, you know, impact factor cannot really justify the impact of research. And, you know, from that study, it also demonstrated the complex nature of how researchers can demonstrate the impact and relevance of their research. I just would like to maybe, from the presenter's point of view, what could be the possible sustainable ways of really evaluating or demonstrating the impact of research to our local context. I think that was my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a question on many people's minds, but would any of the speakers like to address the question of what we measure or mean by impact, as opposed to, as you said, impact factors and citations? Nokuthula?
Yeah, let me take a step at it. It's actually a very tricky question. So the NRF has an impact policy framework that was released last year. And in it is that researchers cannot measure impact of cost at the point of the proposal or funding. That is not even at the end of the proposal, cannot. But what we're asking researchers to do is that what is the intended impact of the research that you are doing? So we're asking them to think and say, when we say, okay, when we normally ask researchers what would be the impact of the research, normally they say 2 papers, 1 student, and that's about how we've been thinking about research. And I was guilty of that, but now we are asking what is the societal intended impact? And also for us as the funder and the department, we have to think about how do we follow up in that intended impact, even at the end of the funding cycle, not even during the funding cycle. How do we do that? So it is a little bit difficult, but my strong belief is that we cannot maintain the general impact that is so bad just because we want another figure to come. Because this is where we are getting stuck, is that we don't know how to count impact, so we are sticking to this number. So I think this is we just need to try and start something. And I tell people, even with open science, I work a lot with UNESCO, how we envision open science and open access now, probably in the next 10 years will be totally different. The movement, when it started 20 years ago on open access, we thought it was all going to be free for all, and we're not going to be having this conversation, but we're having different conversation of cost now, because there are too many players that are in this. Two, I think one of the questions that you're asking is connected to somebody who asked something online, that yes, funders and universities need to think about how they do promotion incentive and assessment, and this is part on how we view impact. For me, what I'm slowly asking at the NRF is that when we invite experts to do reviews, how do we kind of ask them to think outside their box? Because the NRF doesn't do reviews. We ask experts which are still academic, so how this whole ecosystem kind of thinks outside of the system. As an example, I just reviewed an open infrastructure proposal from Wellcome Trust. I was asked, do not go on the internet, do not check the authors, just stick to what we gave you. And there was no information on how many papers they published, how many students. It was just a proposal and the qualitative or narrative of the research of the PIs, and I was supposed to judge the proposal based on that. I think this is where we start to do, because the funder can get that information by themselves, but the review panel needs to judge the proposal based on or whatever based on the proposal at hand, not on somebody's track record. Thank you.
Thank you, Knox. And Glenn, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Just some thoughts on impact. I think it's so important that collaboratively the research assessment is reformed so that the right outcomes are incentivized for researchers. But I watched a webinar recently which really pointed out that the outcome of research shouldn't just be the research paper. The outcome of the research should be how it is communicated to society in such a way that society adopts the new knowledge. And, obviously that's incredibly complex. And I think that we also shouldn't just be concentrating on while we should prioritize our own sustainable development goals, we might be contributing to knowledge that helps somebody else somewhere else in the world. So I think it's important to, perhaps prioritize knowledge transfer more than knowledge production for production's sake. And clearly the wrong metrics are in place. But just to answer it a little bit further, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to share.
Please go ahead.
This is from a Clarivate presentation about including the Emergent Sources Citation Index into the core collection of Clarivate indices. And they've included it for free in the negotiation that we've just had with them. So this will be available to all Clarivate subscribers. I have a problem that this knowledge is owned by a private company and not by academia, but it is what it is. But what's so exciting about this is you can they looked at research to do with the Sustainable Development Goals. And so much more of it is in the Emerging Sources Citation Index than in the traditional DHET approved lists. And I've got hold of a written confirmation from the DHET that they are including and accepting these journals and articles in their lists. And so from a South African point of view, it dramatically boosts what is included. And when you look at the research topic sustainable development compared to the other indices in the Web of Science collection of indices, you'll see that most of it is in the Emerging Sources Citation Index. So this at least is one more positive step in the right direction. But universities collectively will have to think about how they incentivize research. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. colleagues, anybody else who wants to, please do go ahead. But let me, and we've heard Knox speaking about it, but I wonder if anybody else in the audience has any views on how this will change the way we supervise postgraduate students. Let me kick off a little bit, a couple of ideas around this, because a lot of what I do has to do with postgraduate supervision, and I wonder if Sue McKenna would like to comment as well. But, you know, we do tend to emphasize to our students publication in what we call high impact journals. And we do tend to ask them to aim high in terms of where their work is published. And I don't think, and maybe others have comments on it, I don't think that we have really a good system in our universities for measuring the quality of postgraduate work, which might be extended into the communicating to the public, extending the work to the community, demonstrating the societal impact, and so on. In fact, I can say that for very many of the dissertations and theses that I have examined recently, where there has been that attempt to discuss the community impact or the societal impact of the work, other reviewers have been quite critical of that in suggesting that it isn't, in fact, sufficiently academic for a thesis. And I think there's a big dilemma there. And again, I would be interested to hear what everybody has to say. And I'm going to ask, I see Nokuthula's hand is up, and then I see Seydon. So Nokuthula first, and then Professor Mishi. You're muted, Nokuthula.
Sorry, this is where the whole problem lies. And I sometimes say that academics, we are the biggest stumbling block when we talk about this. Because we've been trained in a certain way of thinking, and a certain way of transmitting knowledge, and a certain way of accepting certain sources of knowledge. That these are the authority of knowledge, and how a thesis should be said, how a paper should be, and what does it mean to be a postgraduate. So I think senior academics needs to kind of transform a little bit, also to transform the postgraduates that they supervise, meaning that when such work is presented, Stephanie, I remember I come from traditionally molecular biology and genetics, where people just did stuff in the lab. And when the bioinformatics started coming in, we then had suddenly these PhDs who sat in the computer and never set foot in the lab. I remember there were some people in the department that this work doesn't have any lab. It took a while for them to transition to accept that in any form of life sciences, somebody can just crunch data and still be good enough as any person who spends some time in doing bench work. I think our academics also, we are in that as the Open Science UNESCO recommendation, especially sitting in the continent, there are other knowledge systems, there are other ways to transfer knowledge, there are other sources of knowledge and power that we need to value in the way we communicate our knowledge. So this is, I think you raise a critical issue where we really need to rethink in order for us to make impact.
Thank you. Professor Mishi?
Thank you so much, Professor. And yes, my name is Siren Mishi at Nelson Mandela University. Just to reflect on that question in relation to my individual kind of thinking and approach to supervision. The critical question that I ask a prospective postgraduate student that want my supervision is that whatever topic that they're coming with, it's who cares? Who cares about that? So if they can't answer who cares about that research, it becomes very much difficult to prepare or plan for impact. Then, because we need to be able to identify the stakeholders well in advance, there are multiple stakeholders to any research. So it could be very much advancing scientific aspect in terms of, let's say, from a methodological point of view. Then you see also the journal publication is really going to fit for that. But in majority of cases, you see, for example, a PhD project, yes, it has to produce some journal articles. There's, I don't see anything wrong about that. Then also, because we've asked a question about who cares at the beginning of the journey, throughout the journey, we have to interact with these stakeholders. Then we get a session to talk to the stakeholder, whether it's government or an NGO or whatever, to present now policy brief or very much a brief of the research in non-technical terms. In some cases, we're dealing with society. We need then also to translate that research into very much layman's language. That is why we take also that research and publish as a newspaper article to the broader community in layman's terms. So the journal has been published very technical, some policy brief or research brief, non-technical, but specifically targeting some practice or some policy, then a newspaper article that also pertains to the broader society. So whoever picks can pick from there. And also there is often a feedback loop then back even into the classroom, that a PhD student, master student can then come also and really present to other students, as there is also impact in that. So we need to think from a broader, multiple stakeholders, multiple forms of outputs. That is how we can be able to achieve then an impact. But if we target on one aspect, it might be very, very difficult, and we can continue, have greater debate in terms of which one is the best impact and the like. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And let me ask Louis Duplessis, and then I'll get to Sue and Leti, who've put comments in the chat. Louis?
Colleagues, good afternoon. Thank you very much. So the initial question was around postgraduate supervision. And I come from a discipline where I'm an architect by practice and been in education for 10 years in that discipline. And we come from a discipline where critique is embedded right from the beginning. You have to, from first week of your studies, stand up, speak about your work, defend it to a class of 60, 100, etc. And we're at the moment at our university, Durban University of Technology, transitioning to oral defense for PhD students. And the amount of fear about presenting and defending is quite surprising. People, supervisors and students themselves seem very afraid of open discussion about discussing their work. And it's almost as if there's this idea that you either have to be bulletproof, i.e. there's nothing that can possibly be said against your work, or you avoid it at all costs. And I was reflecting on this in terms of, quite often this is around the way in which our supervision models are structured. I know that for the vast majority of the supervisors that I come into contact with where I am, they still use an old, disengaged, production-based formula. Send me your chapter, I'll mark it up in Word, I'll send it back to you. There's hardly any discussion, there's hardly any modeling from the supervisor about what's happening. Supervisors themselves aren't keeping up to date with how impact and engagement is supposed to be happening. I'm not seeing, all these things that we've been talking about newspaper articles, putting up flyers and posters in clinics or whatever. Part of that is the students who are being supervised need to actually see that modeled by the supervisors. The supervisors need to be able to suggest those sorts of things. And so how can we expect our students that we are supervising to engage in those things if we are not engaging with them ourselves? So I think quite a lot of this is the supervisors need to model what is required or what we are trying to achieve. And what they need to realize is that we are constantly shifting. 20 years ago, what research was and how South African research is engaged is very different from what we're doing now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a liberty and ask Sue McKenna if she'd like to comment, because I know she needs to leave and she had some comments a moment ago. So Sue, would you like to make a comment before you go?
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Thanks for an absolutely brilliant seminar. I thoroughly enjoyed all three presentations. Yeah, I want to come back to this issue, which I see a lot of people are talking about in the chat, about the direct funding that DHET pays within our block grant for publications. Now, I understand, given the academic sanctions during apartheid, the idea of a new higher education sector when apartheid ended, there was this idea that we needed to have these financial incentives to build our research profile as a country. I completely get that. But I think that the negative side effects now outweigh the benefits. And I also think, I mean, since 2015, DHET has repeatedly told universities, please don't pay incentives for publication. It has perverse consequences. But we know that this continues, whether it goes into people's research codes or even into their salaries. All but 2 universities in South Africa continue to pay bonuses for publications, even though you don't get bonuses for teaching well or any other part of your job. So yeah, my bottom line is that we need to change the funding formula, get rid of paying directly. No other country in the world pays direct funding for publication output. It really feeds into, yeah, speaking as an editor and as a reviewer, I really don't need to see another poor article in my lifetime. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue. So we have many different conversations, if you like, or comments being made here. But I think it is very interesting from the point of view of where we started to just note that we are all aware of how we might be extending, if you like, what our students are expected to do, or accepting that they need to do more than publish academic articles. And I see Glenn has just put an example of an article about beyond the publication. These are all, I think, very valuable comments. And yes, we all need to be thinking about how we address that. But maybe I could ask each of the speakers, just as a last comment, to suggest how we might be effective in influencing policy. No, we accept that there are changes needed, but how could we be the most effective in influencing the policies that we are at the moment discussing as being not helpful? Nokuthula? You're muted.
Too many devices. I'll wear 2 hats. I will wear my other hat as a recovering academic, as I call myself. I think as institutions, especially in South Africa, that universities are kind of autonomous organs that academics can make a change on how they want to be assessed on all promotional policies. And within USAF, in that sphere, we could make institutional changes. Then I will wear my NRF hat, and it's from last week's conversation and the previous conversation with the department. I am happy that the movement towards the open science policy, which in broader term covers open access, at least once we have an official government document that governs how open access is seen, open science is seen, open data, it will be easier then for government, because in that policy, things about funding of the instruments on how we fund open access and how we move from these paid models to equitable models are kind of mentioned. Then we will have some type of an implementation plan that will help us. But at an immediate effect, I think at institutional level, we have more influence on policy. And of course, as a government on our side, with USAF and other institutions for us to put pressure on government to get that policy document out to our hands.
Thank you. Kleyn?
I'm not sure I can add anything more to that, except there just needs to be more collaboration and coordination. And I think we do need to, I do know that USAF is looking seriously into this and has a working group on open access. And I'm hoping that through those initiatives, Dr. Matutu will be able to influence decision makers to come together and move as fast as possible around formulating plans, to change things. But clearly, some change. Sometimes it's interesting. I mean, that if people have a problem with getting things done, that they say, don't talk about motivation, start doing it, and the motivation will come out of that. And I think there's signs of things starting all over the place. There's Diamond Open Access work happening. There's the ASAF Cielo thing. There's there are a whole lot of initiatives already underway, but I think everybody just needs to keep pushing and collaborating. And the amazing thing is everybody wins when you collaborate. Everybody and more.
Thank you. Leti, do you have a final comment?
Thank you, Prof. Burton. Yes, I think I agree with both Kleyn and Nokuthula. I think it's also the way in which we teach our students and our early career researchers, and maybe that specifically within the African model that we work with, it's very clear that a lot of universities work very closely with government departments. And that actually impacts on a variety of things that they do, farming and sustainable farming and water quality and numerous other things. And maybe if we get to a point where governments can really start to see the impact of the research that we do, that would maybe also help to change a little bit of that perspective. So I am very fond of the transdisciplinary research methodology, and I've posted a link in the chat just where you can get an idea of the project that Prof. Burton and I work on and the kind of products that we gave credit to for those early career researchers that really included everything that they've done in their communities and that has supported and had real impact on those communities that those fellows worked in. Thanks very much, Prof.
Thank you. Thanks so much. A last chance for anybody who would like to make a last comment. Kleyn?
Thanks so much. There's one thing I forgot to mention. I mean, I went over my time, so apologies for that. But one of the other burning questions for a lot of researchers is, what about all the problems to do with predatory publishing? Now, whilst the read and publish agreements are certainly not perfect, they create a wonderful opportunity for researchers to make sure that their work is more visible. And the question is, how do they know that it's not predatory publishing? Well, the very definition of predatory publishing is that somebody is making money illegally or in a way that takes advantage of the current system through offering open access publishing services. Now, the fact that no publisher gets any more money from a read and publish agreement, and that it's the cost of the publishing is covered, means that researchers can safely publish in the journals in the read and publish agreements without having to worry about predatory publishing.
Thank you. There is a hand up, so let me give you that chance. It's Nuelma Muhati. You need to unmute. Nuelma, if you can unmute, you are welcome to speak.
Yeah,
Okay, there you go. And I did again. No. Okay, I think maybe I should invite you to write a comment in the chat because we're not hearing you. I think we've covered a huge amount of ground here. This has been recorded and we will put it onto the USAF YouTube as a recording in due course. And I think for one, I'm certainly going to go back and listen to this again. I think we've covered some really very important points and quite wide-ranging, right from the issues around open publishing, but further into how we assess research, how we train our students, how we choose research topics. It has been a very broad-ranging discussion, and I think that's exactly what a community of practice is all about. So I think we can close. I would like to just say in closing, thank you very much to our three speakers and some very valuable inputs. I'm not supposed to be using my hand at the moment because I've hurt it, but I have made 2 pages of notes, and I am going to think very hard about how we might be publishing this in the public press and writing some articles around all of this so that we can, for example, find the attention of some of our policymakers, but also our general public. So, colleagues, thank you again. Thank you very much to everybody who has attended today. And I think it has indeed, as in the chat, been a very stimulating webinar. So thank you, everybody. And please keep the conversation going. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.